Poetry as a form of currency. The idea initially sparked in my head during one of my poetry seminars. We were asked to think about how we could potentially sell our poetry. What would be the price for our poems? Can one really put a price on their work of art? And if so, how does one measure it? Feeling conflicted, I decided to present poetry as its own form of currency, hence showing how poetry has its own value. The first step in presenting poetry as a form of currency was to transcribe some of my own poems on banknotes. This in itself raises the question of, do the banknotes add value to my poetry, or does my poetry add value to the banknotes? Following the line of thought that poetry itself can be its own form of currency, I believe that the poems do add some value to the banknotes, not because they're written by me, but rather because currently there are only 4 £10 notes and 1 £5 note circling somewhere around the UK with my poems written on them, hence the rarity of the banknote poems raising their value. As fun as it was writing poems on banknotes though, my concept did not stop there. I used the aforementioned banknotes in order to purchase ingredients for cookies. By using banknotes as the canvas for my poetry, I am also displacing the poems from where people would normally expect to find them and placing them on an everyday object where they would not expect to find poetry written on as they get their change from the supermarket. Therefore, when they are to take that banknote, a momentary shock and confusion might accompany them. In this way, one could say that I am adopting a form of guerrilla poetry, compelling people to look beyond the number and notice the words written underneath, thus attacking them with my poetry. As a way of maximizing the reach of my banknote poems, I went to more than one supermarket to purchase those ingredients, hence maximizing the reach of my poetry. Having exchanged my poetry for flour and sugar, I got to work and made 2 types of cookies. This leads us to the final and main stage of my concept, selling cookies for poetry. Using the slogan, "A cookie for a poem," I managed to sell all of my cookies, making me richer by more than 40 poems. What was interesting to observe was the way in which people were thrilled at the idea of getting a cookie for free. Only it wasn't for free, not even close. I might not have been taking money from them, but they were giving me something much more valuable. They were giving me slivers of themselves. They were giving me their time and their words. One of my favorite parts was when people asked if it would be okay to write in another language. While the majority of the poems were written in English, there were a number written in French, Greek, Italian, Japanese and German, just to name a few of the languages in which the poems were written in.
Έξω με περιμένει να φάω η Ελένη. Έφτιαξε μπισκότα, μα δεν έχουνε καρότα.
I love you yesterday and today, but I need to think why I am here in Chinese, Polish, German and English.
Expression comes in many languages, illustrating which skin people find more comfortable wearing when voicing their ideas on pieces of paper. hence breaking language barriers because a poem is still a poem in any language it might be written in. Therefore, this further enhances the notion of the value of poetry, because even if I couldn't understand some of the poems, they were still worth a cookie, illustrating how attaching a price to poetry is not as feasible as it may seem. Each poem has its own value. That is why poetry is a form of currency on its own. It was lovely witnessing the process of poetry coming to life, as images merged together into words and sentences. Interestingly enough, some people were very eager to share some of the poems they had already written, never before having shared them with anyone. Yet the cookie seemed to be enough to convince them otherwise.
Read it again.
Oh my god.
I'll be surprised.
Fresh was a gist, a repulsive scent. Yet despite this, to Aldi, there you go.
Give it to me, Jane.
Do I actually get, do you want it?
Yeah.
There you go.
Make something.
What was also very rewarding was the response and interaction I got, not only from the people buying my cookies, but also from people in other countries, replying on my Instagram stories of the day and sending me their own poems. Also, many of my friends shared my idea of poetry as a form of currency with their teachers and friends, many of whom supported my concept, saying that it was a lovely way of getting people to produce poetry. That was one of my aims, to introduce the making of poetry in a fun and interactive way. When people were stuck, they would ask someone else standing by the table to give them a theme or a word to get their inspiration going. People who did not know each other were making poetry together, creating something and exchanging it. But they were exchanging more than just their poems. They were exchanging ideas and laughter and hugs. They were exchanging human interaction. A good number of people use the well-known template of roses are red, violets are blue, and yet, even with those first two lines being the same, not two poems were completely identical. Ranging from political themes to poems written about the cookies or other people standing there with them, each person attained inspiration from different sources. For some people, it took more convincing than others, as they believed that their poetry was, as they called, not good enough. Yet the point of my conceptual art was not to produce first-class pieces of poetry, but rather to use the idea of poetry as a form of currency in order to make people who would not normally exercise the art share their work and voice their thoughts. The fact that they were exchanging their poetry for a cookie that was made as a result of my own poetry being exchanged for ingredients further proves the concept of poetry as a form of currency, as the poems were given value since they were exchanged for something. Even if it was only for 24 hours, I managed to create a miniature of an economic network based purely on poetry.